Hi, this is Mark J. Ryan, and welcome to Brainwashing Central, where we will explore through common sense how brainwashing, propaganda, hypnosis, priming, subliminals, NLP, and other modalities are being used to shape yours and others' behaviors. Hey everybody, it's Mark J. Ryan, and welcome back to BrainwashingCentral.com. Well, when I did the podcast a few days ago, I had no idea how quickly what I was saying was going to accelerate and come true. So because of the speed of that and what I've spent doing the last 2 days reading over Facebook and unfollowing lots of rainbows on there, not for the sake that they liked the idea of gay couples being able to do what they wanted to do in marriage, which I don't really call it marriage. It's more of a union. Marriage is the meaning, the original definition of it that pretty well has been in human history for thousands of years, and all different religions and cultures around the world is the union of opposites into one. And an opposite is more like a nut and a screw. It's a yin and a yang. They're separate things that become one. And as far as a union, if two bolts or two nuts want to get together and they want to unionize and pay taxes under the law, I have no problem with that. Seeing gay couples together and enjoying their life, easy. That's easy. Yes, they're Americans. They're human beings. But to take away marriage and the word marriage and try to expand it or change its meaning, its interpretation, I'm not going for that. And that's my conscience and that's my belief, and I've got the right to it. And you can condemn me and call me all kinds of names for it. However, the original meaning of the word marriage is the union of opposites, male and female, into one. It's also a very spiritual secret. It's what I'm going to be talking about in waking people up. The main reasons for this show is to show you what's going on in the world, to show you what's happening to you. Many will fall away and just not believe it. And I'm not claiming to have the truth. What I am asking you to do is to take the data that I'm giving you and realize how you might be insufficient in your data of your belief system to consider other things and to pull away from it instead of defending identities. Defending identities is what most spiritual people that have woken up or are awake or trying to get you awake talk about, the idea of getting away from your identities. And that doesn't mean forgetting about who you are as a parent or as somebody that works in business and things like that. But we have multiple identities. And for us to put certain ones in front of another can really lock us in a lot of times into belief systems that can be detrimental to us, to our culture, and to society. Now, there's been a movement, it's been going on for ever since Machiavelli wrote his book, and probably before then. I think the Chinese had some books about the art of war, and different books that people wrote about how to control and manipulate people and masses. And most of the times they were kingdoms, big pyramid type rule, one person or a group of people at the top, and then the pyramid at the bottom were the masses. And to me, the United States was formed out of a kingdom by a group of really intelligent people that said, look, how would we create this if we didn't want to be under kingdoms? Because kingdoms cause slavery, and kingdoms can change. Kings can be really nice, and kings can be really nasty, and they can steal from people. They can basically do whatever they want, and the people have to suffer under that. But if you aren't underneath a kingdom that is oppressing you, and you have a certain type of a freedom to believe the way that you want to believe, what can then happen to you as a spiritual person, as a human being, if you are allowed that freedom? And the founders of the United States of America, yeah, they had some errors, and yeah, they put some things in there, and including slavery, and we think that, well, Americans were the first ones to do that. No, slavery, unfortunately, had been going on for thousands of years, but this is the country that did stop slavery, and pretty well from our stopping of the slavery, a lot of slavery around the world has ended because of it. And the beauty of the Constitution and the Americans that founded it and formed it was the ability to change the idea of what we considered slavery. And that happened, and it it was part of a civil war. But if you really, some people look at the Civil War and say, now that was more about banking than it was slavery. They put the slavery out there initially, and the history remembers it as slavery. But if you go look at some of the banking regulations and laws that were going on during that period of time, what the North wanted to do with the South and the banking system and the Confederate money, their own separate money, and how they counterfeited it and destroyed it and everything, you may be a little closer to the truth. And that's not discounting slavery. Obviously, slavery is wrong. It should be abolished. However, today, there's a type of slavery going on, psychological slavery, that is being used based on lots of years of research, again, from Machiavelli, from different people around the world that have understood power and passed it down throughout the years to other powerful people. But it has taken on a different spin right now. They really, all these universities that do these psychological tests, and you read about them in different magazines. If you get Psychology Today, Science, I get the magazine. I can't even remember the name of it right now, but it's Science of Mind or something like. It's not the New Age Science of Mind, but it's psychology. Not Psychology Today. It is Scientific American Mind, and it'll go through all kinds of different tests. My friend Kevin Hogan knows a lot of people at universities and corporations that do their own private testing that you don't hear about. You hear about universities and what they're doing, and they have to go through a lot of ethical things to do what they're doing, knowing the consequences of what might happen. Being a public or private university, if it goes too far. But private corporations don't have to tell you anything about their research. But some of it has leaked out. And anyways, the point I'm getting to is that it's gotten to a point right now where it's so powerful and it's so proven in the way it works that, as I referred to in the last podcast, what was the movie with Gandalf and Lord of the Rings, the power of the ring, that it gets to a certain point where, that the power in one person's hand is too much. Human beings having that much power don't have the capacity. It's like I saw this video on YouTube where they're in Africa, and it's a group of African rebels, and there's a monkey around them, a fairly smart monkey, and I don't know if it was a chimpanzee or what kind of monkey it was, but it was their friend. And one of the guys decided for fun to give him an AK-47. And you can search on YouTube for AK-47 monkey. Well, this monkey quickly remembered how they were pulling the trigger, and it figured out how to pull the trigger, and it's spinning around pulling the trigger. These guys are all running in all different kinds of directions. Obviously, a power was put into that monkey's hands that was way too much for its responsibility to handle it. And that's what the Lord of the Rings is about. That's what the United States is about. The United States was to say, what do we have to do to make it so individuals can have rights and freedom away from an oligarchy, which is a bunch of group of people together that control things, secret, hidden, or outright. When we look at the mafia movies, we see that, Al Capone getting all the different factions together, the people, Meyer Lansky in New York City and Chicago, you get these people together and you say, okay, look, we're going to divide it up equally so we're not fighting amongst each other trying to get it. That's, and I may not be pronouncing it right, but oligarchy is a group of people that decide to do it, but usually there's one on top. But it's separated powers. And then you got the king. The king just runs everything. And the power can be transferred. You can have the power of a king or a queen. And if early on, a lot of times the parents would die, and the younger person, when Peter the Great and in Russia, I can't remember, but the daughter was Elizabeth. I remember, when I was at the Kremlin and going through, and we were seeing all the different things that in the museum there that I spent about 3-4 hours there. And the lady that was the tour guide, we got to the certain point, and all of a sudden, all this extravagant stuff was there. These carriages, these dresses, and it was from the daughter, Elizabeth, who took over the kid, but she was young, and she didn't have the experience and the power. But the power of the kingdom was turned over her, so as if they were still alive, she now had the rule of the kingdom of Russia. And again, I may not be getting everything right. Get the point of what I'm saying, underlying it. Your mind will try to go and find reasons not to believe what I'm saying, and that's fine. That's the way the mind works. I expect that. What I'm looking for is for you to consider the process. But we ended up getting to a certain part of this museum in the Kremlin that all of a sudden there was all this stuff by Elizabeth, and they said that she wore these beautiful ornate dresses, of which they had in the museum, and the lady said she had over 50,000 dresses, never wore the same dress twice, always wore a new dress. But then she says that basically she broke Russia, she broke the bank. She spent so much money, she had all that power and she had all that money, but she didn't have the control, the character. A lot of secret societies, what they'll do is not teach certain people until they build character, because they know if they get the power without the character, that it's going to be like that monkey with the AK-47. Same thing with Elizabeth. And I asked the lady, the Russian lady, and I said to her, I said, hey, what happened with Elizabeth? How was she able to plunder the money, and how was she able to do all this stuff? And she turned around and looked at me kind of in a funny way. She was an older lady. She was, I truly believe she was KGB, and the people that were my handlers, they laughed at me at first, but then when I told them what her background is and what her college was and her age, they go, she's KGB, or former. But she was a great lady. I don't care what she was. She was great. She was honest, and I asked her, I said, what's going on with this? I mean, how come this happened? And she looked at me and she goes, because there was no man to stop her. And we laughed. We all laughed. But the point was, there was no power. There was nobody there that had the ability to say no. So as we go back to the forming of America, and the idea that one person in power, not having the full character, can lead a country astray, can break a country, can take a country down the tubes, can form a, Nazi Germany, can form a Stalin's Russia, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, North Korea right now, and what happens to people the way they live. Would any of you want to live under those dictators and under those domains? So the people of the United States that formed this country looked back at history, not necessarily the recent history, but old history, and realized how kings and kingdoms work, and said, what can we do to break this up and to make this into separations and a balance of power? That if one of them gets too cocky or gets too powerful, so is the president, let's say the presidency, the executive branch, or the judicial branch, or the House, the congressional branch, the lawmaking part of it, what do we do? So the Congress, the House, is meant to write the laws. The president is meant to enact the laws to make sure that they're enforced. And the Supreme Court is meant to be the interpreter, not the interpreter, but the actual, is this constitutional? So if we take it into the analogy of an American baseball game, you've got two teams, and then you've got an umpire. And the umpire is supposed to be the Supreme Court. It's supposed to judge fairly whether that's a ball or a strike, whether that's a hit or an out. And then you've got the two teams. You know, you've got the one team that's writing the law and the other team that's supposed to enact the law, the executive part of it. And then you've got all kinds of little different other buffers. Also, we spread out the power of the military, the National Guard, the militia, into counties, and sheriff being supposedly the highest law of the land until the federal government decided it was going to take that over and start gaining more and more power, which it has. And that was because you isolated. If we look at a cancer, if you've got a cancer all throughout the body and it's systemic, that person pretty well doesn't have too much of a chance. But if the cancer is isolated, other parts of the body can go in there and save that. So that was what the federal government was supposed to be for, to say, okay, there's corrupt counties throughout the United States. Down south, there's corrupt counties up north. There's corrupt counties in Chicago. There's corrupt counties in New York, different places. And the federal government was supposed to go in there and say, look, we're going to use the power of all the other counties, all the other states, and say, look, we're trying to keep a semblance of the law, and you got to stop doing this. And that whether they take them out, physically or take them out legally, whatever it is. You think of Al Capone in Chicago, how much control he had on that city, on the politicians and everything else. And like a cancer that maybe was a skin cancer or a wart or something, he was able to be cut out. And then, the city is still fairly corrupt to this day, but nothing like it was at that point. That system has worked really well. But there is another part of the element. There's psychological war and there's financial war. And even though we're not in a physical war, we're in psychological and financial wars right now, big time. So one of the great things is if you're running a psychological war is a lot of people don't know you're there. It's like an invisibility, especially if they become really, really good at it. And if they also control the money, then you can really have a kind of a carrot and stick mentality. You have pleasure and pain. You can do all kinds of things with money. If you take the money away from a nation, if you tie the money up from a nation and don't put it out there, and they don't understand how to barter and they don't know how to exchange things, what begins to happen? You create all kinds of chaos. And then you start to beg for the kings of banking or the kings of psychological manipulation to come and save you because you have been trained, conditioned not to be able to do it yourself. I'll get into some of that too with how the British did things with the Irish. They stopped them from speaking their language when they were in school. So they taught them new stuff that went along with the British, let's say, theology way of the way the world should work. And when they took the Irish children, they knew they couldn't get the adults, but they would educate the children. They would take the Pied Piper. Okay, the adults aren't going to do what they're supposed to do, so we'll come and get your kids. And that's what they did with the Irish. And I'll read you a little bit more about that, how they took the language away from the Irish so they didn't have a history. So taking history away from people is one way that you really manipulate and you control it, changing history. The victor writes the history books. And why do they do that? They write the history books because if they can change it, that when people look back, they won't get angry about it. They'll just think, oh, that's the way it was. And these are really the good guys. The guys that are running the show are really the good guys. But what happens if they can take that power and now they take it to a centralized government, which a lot of our forefathers and said, do not have a centralized bank. Do not have a centralized bank. You look back at Andrew Jackson and Alexander Hamilton and the stuff that was going on between those guys, trying to stop the bank and then trying to implement the bank. And then finally in 1913, you get the Federal Reserve, which is central bank. It actually came in before then. But what happens? You have the ability through how much money you put out there or how tight you make money to control people's behavior. You add that to the psychological factor of controlling people's behavior and you can run a country, even though it has counties, even though it has separate parts like that. And think about it, back when we formed America, when the forefathers formed it, it took a long time. They would have 4-year terms for people. Why? Because it took forever to go back and forth between California and Washington, D.C. So they had to give these people times to get back and forth. Well, that's changed now. But there's something really nefarious, and that's something that I know about because I've participated in, hopefully mostly for the positive element, is to say how is this power, the psychological war, being used to manipulate you. Well, in the last few days, and this will date the podcast, the idea of what happened with the Confederate flag, what happened with the Trans-Pacific Pact, or whatever that's called, and then what happened with gay marriage. A lot of people were really, really happy about the gay marriage thing, but they didn't think about what they paid for it. They didn't think about the contract that was going on. And we're going to get into that. And I'm going to read about 20 pages out of a book. So this is probably going to be a multiple podcast. But I'm going right for the depth of it. I'm going right for the heart of it. I'm going to give you the most powerful part of what I know of how this is done in layman's terms as best I can. So I highly recommend that you listen to this and listen to it over and over and really look at it as a process. Because if you're on one side of the gay marriage issue or on the other side of the gay marriage issue, I don't care. What I'd like you to look at is the power and the psychological manipulation that was being used to get this through and the results of this and how it's impacting our country. And yes, we don't see it necessarily at this time, but the end result of what you will see. You think about the game of Jenga. They pull pieces out, and it's all right. The structure is still stable, but the more pieces they pull out, the less stable the structure becomes until the structure finally falls and crashes. We are at crash point. This thing is jiggling and wiggling, and what happened in the last few days either is going to be people waking up and changing it and shifting it really quick, or it will be the end. It will crash down, and it's happening really fast. So what I want you to do is, as best you can, forget about what side you are on, whether you're pro-gay marriage or against gay marriage. I want you to look at the process of how it got here. And I'm going to go back into history. I'm going to go back into the 60s and show you how this thing progressed to where it is now. And the power that is being used, how it's been refined. And it's not just refined, this power of brainwashing to get people to do things, but it changes your mind about things. It's now being used nefariously. It can be used to get people and to get gay rights and to get abortion issues and to get, I'm trying to think of some things from the conservative side. But you know what? Basically, because the liberal side has been so close to socialism and communism, a lot of the communistic ideas that have come out of Russia and that come out of China and North Korea, which I'm going to show you. And again, you're probably jumping, oh, wait a minute, he's good. Just listen to the process first if you can. And if you can't, that's fine. The people that I'm talking to will be aware of it and have the ability to do it and take this knowledge and be able to use it. If you've shut off and shut down already, that's great. That you have that right, and you're going to go away and not learn something that you might find this technology being used in your the people that you don't believe in's hands, and they're using it against you, and you're not going to figure out what's going on because it goes both ways. I remember years ago when I was working with Kevin Hogan at a booth in Nashua, New Hampshire at the National Guild of Hypnotherapists. And we had this guy come by the booth, and I'm like, man, I know this guy, or I recognize this guy, and very professional, very cocky, but he was looking like a little kid that had done something wrong. And he's looking at all the different things of persuasion that Kevin has on the table. And Kevin has studied persuasion. He's got the second best-selling book on persuasion next to Cialdini called The Psychology of Persuasion. And the guy's looking back, and finally I looked to him. I said, come here. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, what do you want? What are you looking for? What do you need? I said, you're looking like a little kid that just got caught with his hand in the candy store. And he kind of laughed, and he goes, I'm looking to see what I maybe can find out about this hypnosis stuff. And I said, yeah, but I said, you got a deeper reason. I said, what's going on? Well, this was outside of the Massachusetts area, so you can imagine, liberal bastion. Some of the names mentioned, I don't have to go into, but they are very recognizable names. But I got talking to the guy, and he finally, leaned over the table like he was telling me a secret. He goes, look, the Republicans kicked our ass in the last election, and we know they're using this stuff, and we don't have any idea about what it is. And we want to learn everything about it and be able to use it. I think that was in 2004 or 2005 or 6 or something like that. And 2008, things have changed dramatically. And then, anyways, I won't go any farther with that. But a lot of that stuff all of a sudden began to be used. Modern day stuff, it's not like this hasn't been around. It's been around for lots of years. Edward Bernays, their book Propaganda. You got Ivan Pavlov, who did the stimulus response stuff with Russia back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. That stuff all developed. We hear about the initial phases of that. What did that develop into? It developed into brainwashing. And brainwashing, the term actually came out of the Korean War back in the 50s, because a lot of our boys came back from Korea and had adopted the communist mentality, the communist belief system. And they didn't know how this had happened. The boys themselves, the men, didn't know how it had happened. And our psychologists and everybody was like, what's going on? And they weren't abused. They weren't tortured, but they were psychologically manipulated. Now, that's back in the 50s. And you're talking American soldiers, patriots that go over there and are fighting a war, but yet come back believing in a new system and how they did that. And it was basically done by manipulation of value systems. Value systems. And what I'm going to go into, and what I'm going to start going into, and because it's such forthright right now and prominent, is how this was adopted by the gay rights movement or homosexual rights movement, how they took it on and how they used this to change the values. Because in 1973, if you think about this, 1973, when it was changed, before then, homosexuality was considered a mental disorder in the DSM, in the psychiatrist's book. Again, right or wrong, whoever made those determinations, I'm not going into this. I want to say, what did they do? Incredibly sophisticated technology, but really pretty simple principles of how do you take from 1973, where this is where gays are being made fun of, which I don't agree with, where gays were being tortured. When I was that age, in 73, when that was happening, I had a good friend that was, I now found out was gay. At that point, I didn't know what. He was called a sissy, and people would make fun of me for hanging out with him. I really liked this guy, and I liked his sister too. His sister was gorgeous, and I had but he was a good friend of mine, and he was a really nice guy. Today, he's a professional writer, and I would get into arguments and fights with different people. I'm like, leave him alone. There's nothing. What's going on with this? So I don't have an issue with who people are. I have more of an issue of how they are and what they're doing with something. They get a power, and if they've got anger or an upset, or if they've got an axe to grind, and they're using this power against people, not just to become more free or to have rights, but to actually psychologically manipulate and brainwash people out of their belief system, shame people into new belief systems using this technology, I've got an issue with that, because that power, as good as it is, as powerful it is, now can be taken and used for just about anything. And what happened in the last few days in America is that the umpire decided to take sides and play and coach one of the teams. They passed law. They took the side of making law. Now, one of the things with Obama that's ticked a lot of people off is that he now uses executive orders to pass laws. It's not like Bush didn't do it either before him or other people. But when you take certain ideologies and start to use it to pass law, and then you just go one after another without care. I don't care what Congress says. I have a pen, and I have executive orders. I will change laws. And then the Supreme Court comes in and says, I'm not going to be the umpire anymore. I'm actually going to side with this team and not interpret law, balls and strikes, but I'm actually going to kind of say that this may be a strike, but I'm going to call it a ball. So the person can get to walk to first base. So they start to join the team. And that's what's going on. Now, when you get all three branches of the government doing law and not playing their own role, we're in for real trouble, because our basic system is going to fall apart because the system relies on confidence of the system. Yet a lot of the people that are receiving government benefits and everything like that, they're going to continue to receive their government benefits, and they're not going to argue against the government. But why? Because why won't they argue against it? Because they're receiving something. They're getting pleasure, so to speak, instead of pain, and they're being taken care of. It's what I call the government plantation. I mean, when you receive something, a lot of the anger from the black community and different communities isn't because of the racism that we think is blatant racism. It's the racism of taking away the language of how people do things. When you keep them on for generations, welfare and public assistance, and don't help them and train them how to be self-sustaining individuals, human beings, there becomes an anger because you have to rely on other human beings. And and they know that they don't have this inside of them, and they're missing it, and they don't have the ability to go out there for generations. To me, that's slavery. That's another form of slavery. It's not called slavery. It's called taking care of people. It's called food stamps, it's called, and not that people don't need this. Please do not generalize. I'm talking about people that have been on this, and I'm not talking just black people. I'm talking white people and Hispanic people and Asian people. But mainly I'm talking about black people in this sense, that the slavery is like with the Irish, they took the language away. They took the culture away. They said, look, stick with us. We'll pay for your food. We'll pay for your housing. But what they got that. They received that. They got the carrot. But what is the stick? What did they lose? And the anger is they've lost the ability to interact with themselves in their community and know who they are. They don't have an identity based on what they can do. It's based on what they can receive. And consciously, it may not be an issue, but I'm going to tell you, unconsciously, they know that they're trapped. This traps people. This traps people. And I'm sorry, but the Democrats have known this for years. And for the Republicans to start going along with it now and doing that, anyways, it's a different story. But let's go back to the law. And once the confidence is lost, everything's going. You look at what's happening with Greece right now in the world. That is a huge line of dominoes getting ready to go down because of what's happening with Greece. They made Greece dependent. Greece went into the EU. It should have never gone into the EU, but it went into the EU. And now it's bailout after bailout after bailout that become a dependent. And then Germany and other countries are saying, wait a minute, I'm tired of paying for this. You know, Germany paid a huge price with the integration of East and West Germany. Margaret Thatcher tried to stop that from happening. She goes, because Germany will be a juggernaut again. They'll be a financial juggernaut. They're really good with money. And again, it's keeping too much power out of a small group or an individual person's hands. And this aim with the Trans-Pacific Pact or whatever, the TPP, is to get power in limited number of hands. More power in limited number of hands. You know, there's thousands of different news media outlets that are all traced back to 6 corporations in America. And you can't tell me that those 6 corporations don't define a policy. It's not independent journalism. And this whole idea of centralization is what our forefathers were against. So if you've got the 3 branches of the government that are supposed to balance each other, but now are starting to centralize into one belief system and usurping the laws they're there to uphold, that is, you may be able to marry each other, but if this country goes to pot and crumbles real quick, that's not going to mean anything. So what did you give up? You got something, but what did you give up in the process of this? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and show you how this is done and how they did it and how it worked. I'm going to go through about 20 pages of a book and give commentary on the book. But there's a couple other things I want to talk about. And just consider something for a moment. If electricity is pulled right now, let's say something happens. Let's say we get some of these ISIS people and they come over here and they start blowing up our power stations or dams or whatever like that. Or you get some rebels or whatever it is, or you get some angry liberals. I don't care what you want to say, but somebody starts cutting off power stations. Have you ever really considered what happens to you and your family at that point? If it's cut off for an extended period of time, if this country does start to crumble, if the financial system crumbles, the infrastructure crumbles, all kinds of wealthy people are moving out of this country. You don't know about it, but if you look and read and not just be looking for what's going to make you feel good today, look for what's going to make you feel good tomorrow. The fact that you're wondering, why are all these wealthy people leaving this country? Why are they abandoning this country and going to private islands that are highly secured? Because they know something's coming. They know ahead of time that something's coming. So what happens if your electricity goes? That means no gas stations can pump gas. So what you got in your car is what you got left. Means you're not going to heat your house in the wintertime. Means you don't have any light to read by. Means you don't have a refrigerator to keep food cold. When that food goes bad in your storage of what you have, how will you eat? Because the stores can't refrigerate their food. And if the gas station pumps aren't working, how do the trucks with the food get into your area? And then you're going to find all kinds of people that aren't going to just be stable. They're going to go out and they're going to say, no, I got to feed my kids, and I don't like that. And they're going to go out and they're going to start stealing and rioting and stuff. How many of those truckers do you think are going to want to bring food into that? We know what happened during the riots in L.A. Truckers going through there. Reginald Denny, what happened to him? And it doesn't matter what part of town they're going to be in, that you're going to see this happening. You're going to see white people rioting. You're going to see Mexican people rioting and Hispanics rioting. You're going to see Asians rioting. It's going to be crazy. So I want you to think about what a fine line, how far out on the branch we are if we lose electricity. Now, what happens to your internet? What happens to your cell phones? They all require electricity. How will you know what's going on? How will you know what's going on in the world? No television, no cable, no cell phones. You may be lucky to have a guy in your neighborhood that has a ham radio operator that can still communicate with other ham radios around the world and get some kind of an idea. But all your information is stopped. And the reason I'm saying this is I want you to know and really become aware as I go through this how dependent you are on that. There was a system that was in place before then without the electricity, without the phones, on how people got along, how they shared information. Those are not there anymore. They're missing. That level of communication between your neighbors, you just go out and look on the road right now. Nobody's talking to anybody, not in the road, but just walk down the street in any city in America. Where are people? Their heads are down looking at their cell phones. This is conditioning. Where is the information coming from? Is it coming from your neighbors? Are you sharing ideas and talking things out with your neighbors? Or do you have a little filter bubble? By the way, it's a great book called Filter Bubble. Read that book. It will wake you up in itself. So you're getting all your information from certain sources. Now, in 2013, let me pull this article up, okay? Let me just pull this article up. Give me 1 second. Little vignette from Wired today that I read. No single person or group can claim credit for today's historic U.S. Supreme Court ruling declaring that same-sex couples have a constitutional right to marry. The decision is the hard-earned payoff for decades of work by millions of activists, politicians, public figures, and average Americans who have fought relentlessly for this right. You know, rights aren't based on sexual preference, but they just made it that way. To me, a right is the right to speech, the right not to be discriminated against because of your color, the color of your skin. As we'll get into more about it, what a right is, okay? But here's where it starts to get scary to me. Thinking about the electricity, thinking about where you get your information, thinking about everybody's head down. And I'm guilty of this. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this. I'm right there with you, eating breakfast, going out with the family, and Claire's on her iPad, and Kathy's looking at her iPhone, and I'm looking at my iPhone. Max is looking at his iPad or his iTouch. And the article goes on. It says, but in recent years, the giants of Silicon Valley, or Silicon, as I like to call it, Silicon Valley, played an important role in amplifying the call. Leaders of the world's biggest tech companies coupled moral convictions. So tech companies, Silicon Valley, West Coast values, San Francisco mainly, San Francisco values, okay? Companies, Silicon Valley, which is like from a little bit north of San Francisco down to San Jose, huge area, 4.5 million people in the area, maybe more now. Leaders of the world's biggest tech companies coupled moral conviction in support of marriage equality. Remember what we talked about with marriage equality? Well, man and a woman, that would be equality under the definition of marriage, the union of opposites. You can't have equality when it's called union of opposites, when a nut and a nut and a screw go together. That's not marriage, okay? But maybe that's just a technicality. Maybe that definition needs to be expanded. When it comes to law, words mean something. Anyways, coupled moral convictions in support of marriage equality with bottom line financial arguments, carrot and stick, banking, money, with values, moral conviction. Argument that that only the country's most powerful business leaders were in a position to make. When business leaders and businesses start making laws, that is called fascism. That's what happened in Germany. It's fascism. Just really get this. Back in 2013, 278 companies, including Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, filed a brief with the Supreme Court in support of overturning the Defense of Marriage Act, often referred to as DOMA. Businesses in the game of politics, running politics, forcing things to happen. Now, let's talk about businesses making determinations of what law and politics should be. Typical definition of fascism. Why is fascism bad? Because the corporations are not supposed to be doing that. These are individual rights. But when the Supreme Court said businesses can be individuals, that's why they said, let's keep business money out of politics. Let's keep union money out of politics. Let's make it individuals, because the power they have with all these psychological studies, the money that they have, and the ability to say, if you don't like what we're saying, you don't have to work here. It just happened with GoDaddy to a Christian guy. Went in, never mentioned he was a Christian, did an interview, had all the qualifications, perfect candidate for it, got a letter back saying, sorry, we picked somebody else for the job. But what they forgot to do is take off the attachment that was there from the guy that made the decision. And he said, do we really want to hire somebody that has his weight and his religious beliefs? We're trying to form a new image at GoDaddy, and this is not going to be good for us. So his religion and his weight were two images that wouldn't fit in good with GoDaddy. But he never mentioned anything about his religion. But on his Facebook page, he did have stuff about who he was religious. So they looked at his Facebook page and made a decision about him because of his religious beliefs and his weight. Discrimination. Big time discrimination. So you got GoDaddy, you got Apple, you got Facebook, you got Microsoft, you got Amazon. Do these companies have any power? Do these companies occupy any part of your day? 278 companies, including Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Google. Do they occupy any of your day? If they're able, and one of the things we do is we look at websites and we look at the rankings of websites. And one of the things we noticed, a kind of disturbing trend recently as we use some of the software that judges stuff, is that Amazon was constantly interplaying, and different companies would start holding positions at the top, and then they'd fall, and then they'd get different, depending on how relevant your information was and how interesting. But recently, there's been a trend where we see that these top positions are locked in. They don't move. Now, Google has kind of said that they weren't going to do that, but we see it. They're locked into position. They don't move. If those companies believe, as the Google companies want them to believe, as Facebook wants them to believe, when Facebook's got, and you start putting you notice it changes who your posts go. It used to go to everybody, but now it only goes to a few people and certain selected people. And certain posts you put out there are taken down. So what's happening is in fascism is that it's not the majority belief. It's not the belief system that we have as human beings, as we have as Americans, as we have constitutionally. But if you could remember those kids walking down the street and you looking at your iPhone, your iPad, your Galaxy, your Samsung, all those, what are you doing? Who are you taking the information in? Then we think about the NSA and all the information that they have, and what they're able to do with that information. Well, look at astroturfing, as we talked about in the last podcast, which I'm going to get into a little bit more specifically in another podcast. But you can kind of get the heads up and start looking at this and studying this. This is all being manipulated, but how is it being manipulated? And that's what I'm going to go into. I think I might have to leave this as like a first podcast and then start immediately going into the process of How is this happening? How are they doing this? Because if you start to recognize, it gives you a little consumer protection of the mind. It gives you an idea to wake up and to say, holy mackerel, this is being used against me. And by who? And that awareness, that awakening, not only wakes you up for how you've been conditioned and how malleable your mind is, what begins to happen, and this is the important point for me, whatever happens with the rest of it, where we go into the spiritual realm of it, is once you start to understand how manipulatable, or how you can be manipulated, how vulnerable, how plastic your belief systems can be formed and how they have been, because people get into your unconscious mind and you don't know it, and then you start to feel a certain way. In sales, we always say sales is just a transfer of enthusiasm. We sell by emotions, and then we justify by beliefs. But first, you got to get the person in a state, selling states. You got to get them into a state before you then justify it with the logic that they've already given you. And you can do that in sales. But we hold on to that as identity or identities. And if we're able to start letting go of those identities and not be so committed, because we realize it's a scam. The people in Borneo eat people. The people in Yulin, China, have dog and cat eating festivals every year. And you see these beautiful creatures but in America, we eat cow. And we eat pig, which the Muslims and a lot of the Jews find disgusting, and the Indians with the cows find just horrid, just terrible, because they worship the cow, Brahma, the cows. So how is it that we believe differently? And once you start to get that the identity is just a feeling that you're holding, the belief that that's who you are, you can start to break away and start to look at something else. Who am I without these beliefs? What's left? And then we enter into the spiritual realm. So I'm going to go into the political stuff because I think you're going to get an idea of how you're being manipulated and how other people, even if you don't think it's you, look at other people and you'll see how they're being manipulated. This technology is incredible. It's powerful. It works. And they're gathering more and more information on it and refining it better and better every day. But what's happening, it isn't just you being used to free people from stuff. Like I use it to free people from smoking or weight loss, or I help free them from phobias or anxiety and things like that. Fears. Help them become better at what they're doing, at sales, at customer service, at their jobs, go in and help people with companies, help them with their golf games. But what if you don't like how other people think and you get a hold of this technology and you're running the media and you're running the internet and all these other companies, and you say, we don't like how those people think. We want it to be our way. And the other people have no idea we know this technology. And they're all looking at us every day. All those Christians, all those conservatives, all those people that don't believe like we are. Let's use this technology, which I'm about to show you, and manipulate their mind. And then when it happens, they're all in your face. Step in line is what Meghan McCain, John McCain's daughter, who's a leader of Republican youth people, step in line, step in line. These people are not coming to have a nice parade and be fair. They're going to continue to use this technology against you. It's fascism. Now they know that they can use it, the power that it has, to make the Supreme Court. People, when John Roberts last year ruled on Obamacare, he switched overnight. He freaked out the other justices. And they're like, what happened overnight? When he came out there, you go back and you look at the videos and you look at his eyes. His eyes are bloodshot and red, like he'd been crying. You got 600, you got so many people in Congress, you got 9 justices, you got the president. 200, 300, 250 years ago, it would be hard to change all those people's mind. You don't have the communication. But what if before the person even got into power, there was a little dossier on them, every one of them, anything that they'd done wrong. And as long as they continue to do, and they say, look, we've got this dossier, the dossier goes away. It will never come out. Just keep doing what we need you to do. And there's going to be some times where it's going to go against your belief systems. But we've got this dossier, and we're going to treat you real good. You're going to have a great life, and you're going to be wealthy, and you're going to have all kinds of power. But when we need you, you're going to have to do exactly as we say, and no arguing, because we've got this dossier on you. Now, you got a country of 20 million people. You only need to get about 600 of them. Do the same thing with the media. You want your job, it's cushy, it's nice, you got power, you got a name. You're not following you're not following the line. Sorry, something's going to come out on you. Denny Hassert, he spent $3.5 million, Republican from Illinois, I think it is, or Indiana, one of them, Illinois, I think. $3.5 million getting rid of a black man. Well, what happens? All of a sudden, he comes out and he says, as the writer of the Patriot Act, I think this has gone astray and I don't like it. Oops, next thing you know, Denny's been paying off somebody that he had some lurid sexual affair and did some sexual things wrong, da-da-da. Dossier exposed. And this thing is getting out of control. There used to be a balance. People had some kind of an ethical value. They looked up and they did believe that there was a God and that they had to worry about that. What's in the afterlife? But you got a lot of people that don't believe that there's a God. You got a lot of people that don't have that value system, that there's something higher and grander and greater than them that's out there. They tend to lose their respect for the values of other people, and the carrot and the stick works really well on them. So remember when I told you about our boys coming back because we switched the values? Well, if you switch some main values like there is no God, atheism is taking a rise. And if you look at the computer industry, which I'm a computer programmer, I got my degree in data processing, and I worked in that field, and I saw it, and I know a lot of people that really hated Christians, and there was something about that field that they just did not like Christians. They did not like religion. And they were rebels, heavy-duty rebels. Who's running the NSA? Who's taking all that information? And who's running these companies? Google, Amazon, Facebook. And they're controlling the information, and they get a hold of some of this power. Some of the power of the Lord of the Rings. What are we going to do? You think about the CEO of Mozilla Corporation that was outed because they found out he gave a donation because his conscience said, I believe marriage is a union, not a union, but is between two couples. It's a coming together of opposites to form one. They found out that he gave a small amount of money to a company that believed in that, and he was outed. No discrimination suit, no nothing. The guy at GoDaddy. If there's nobody to defend that, the people will lose faith very quickly. And it's whatever you think about Christians, whatever you think about conservatives, I'm sorry, they're the backbone of this country. They're working hard. They're paying taxes. They have a belief in the system. But their belief system just crumbled this week. They're devastated. They're talking about civil disobedience, pastors. So, yes, be happy, be joyful, but you haven't yet considered the opposite end of the equation. What have you lost? What is going to happen? When you lose those people and they have civil disobedience, if they decide to stop paying their taxes and stop working and stuff like that, sorry, that's going to crumble. There's a great piece, and I'm going to put this in a movie, and it stuck with me since I saw it. And it keeps going on. It keeps going. There's information sometimes where you get the information, but then there's some information that just haunts you. It stays with you. And this has stayed with me for years. And it was in the movie The Gangs of New York. Some of you that listened to me before might have heard this, but The Gangs of New York. And there's an argument going on between that's more discussion than an argument, but it's kind of a little bit of an argument in there, between the chief guy that's the criminal, kind of like the Al Capone of New York City, an English guy, Bill, I think it is, Bill Boss Tweed maybe or something like that. But then there was another guy that was the politician that was running the city, and in the background it's got some light. I'll put the clip in. There's a clip of it. There's some lightning and everything, signifying that this is something to pay attention to. This is something dark. And they're talking about the law, and the guy says, look, we have to have schools, and we have to take care of people. We have to make sure they're fed and take care of the infirmed and the weak and stuff like that. And he goes, why? Why should we put all this money? But basically it was argument. And he goes, and they were talking about the law, and he goes, the heck with the law. What do we care about the law? And Then he says the magical statement that's haunted me for years. And if you really keep this thing and you look at everything that I'm saying and you look at what's going on in America, where the justices start taking sides, where Obama's writing executive orders, where we're seeing a massive, fundamentally transform America. Yep. He's going to fundamentally transform America. And it is transparent. We say, well, it's not a transparent administration. Oh, yes, it is. They signaled how they were going to change this country, and they've changed it. Well, here's what Boss Tweed said. The appearance of law must be upheld. The appearance of law must be upheld. Now, here's the kicker. Especially while it's being broken. Especially while it's being broken. So, we've got all kinds of investigations going on to the IRS scandal against conservatives. We've got all kinds of investigations going on into Hillary Clinton's emails, which 8 months after now we found out the backup tapes that they had of Lois Lerner from the IRS, the backup tapes that were subpoenaed by Congress, found out 8 months after they were subpoenaed, have all been erased. And these missing emails from Hillary Clinton, all this stuff, the appearance of investigations. We are going to take this. We're going to get to the end of this. We're going to go after those bankers and found out everything that happened. No bankers, besides Bernie Madoff. During Bush's administration, at least 1,000 bankers went to prison. A lot of them paid fines and different things happened. It was serious. There was a conscience back then. There is no conscience anymore. This is real dangerous territory. When you got fascism working and no conscience, and you've got a lot of hate towards conservatives and Christians, and even if you're a liberal and you're not on that side, there's no thing in saying that basically people, if seeing other people are getting harmed and hurt, they'll start to switch parties, and there will be a certain percentage of people. The Second Amendment is still in place, and that's what worries me. That if that is invoked, the Second Amendment becomes invoked, and we start to go like that, we're in real trouble. But we really know that there's a lot of crime going on right now because all this stuff is happening and everybody knows something's wrong and they blame it on Washington and Hollywood. I'll say Hollywood. They blame it on Washington, but nobody wants to take a side. They're going to take against themselves because a lot of this knowledge is you have to be counterintuitive against yourself. Where am I being biased? The human creature is biased. It takes in information of tiny little bit of information. They say the equivalent of a grain of sand next to the Empire State Building is the amount of information in our electromagnetic spectrum that we're aware of. Not the information that we take in. It's probably an atom of that grain of sand of the information that we have. So what the total information that's available to us, the size of the Empire State Building, what's in our electromagnetic spectrum, what we see and hear and feel, is about a grain of sand next to an Empire State Building. And what percentage of everything that's within that electromagnetic spectrum are you aware of right now in your little place in the world compared to everything in the world and the universe? You can't even get to that place. And you're going to make a determination of what's right and wrong and how things should be. No, we've got to, as a human race, we have to keep this at some kind of a level. I'll leave you with this before we go get right into the hardcore of how this is being done so you can recognize it. I will leave you with something interesting recently was happening to me with what's going on with Russia and Putin. And I kept hearing about this guy. His name is Alexander Dugin. And they call him, Glenn Beck calls him the most evil man in the world. Well, that's going to interest me right there. I thought George Soros was the most evil man in the world, but who was a Hungarian Jew that sold out his other Jews and went and found them and kind of got friends with them and then turned them in. So he and his family, or he actually turned his family members in, but he's one of the richest guys in the world now, and he's determining a lot of the politics that's going on in America. Well, if you got a guy that's going to turn his family, and how hard is it to get him to turn against anybody? And to use his money and his power to do whatever he has to do. He's willing to turn in his own family that end up dying, and friends and people in his hometown. As a Jew, turning in other Jews and other people, how hard is it to get this guy to be and do anything that you want him to do, nefarious or evil? So, I mean, I think that George Soros, if you look at him and you look at Mini-Me and what was that show with Austin Powers, the guy that wanted to take over the world, how similar they look. But they call Alexander Dugin the most evil man in the world. And he has said some pretty, how can I say it, about killing his enemies, what he wants to do to his enemies. I mean, I'm no different than what ISIS is doing or saying, or anybody else talks about and says that wants to, kill different people. So I go in and I figure, okay, this guy is one of Putin's main men. He's one of his mentors. So this guy's got an ear into Putin. Putin really listens to him and pays attention to him. Now, I'm going to put this in a nutshell. We can go into more about him later on, but I listened to him in interviews. One of them was with Vladimir Putin, who used to be on CNN. He was the Russian political correct mouthpiece for Russia during the Cold War on CNN. Very well spoken, English just about perfect, but full-on Russian with the belief system. So I used to listen to him all the time. I was amazed at how he could spin stuff to make it look a certain way. And who knows, maybe a lot of it was the truth too. It wasn't all spin. Part of the deal of why people believe in spin and propaganda is because it has a little bit of truth in it. When they talk about, biblically, the devil basically was telling you 99% truth, but a 1% twist. Twist means wicked, wick. The root of is wicked. Means to twist. Doesn't have to be much, just a little bit. So like railroad tracks separating. If you separate them 1%, you go a few miles down the road and you can't see the other railroad track so far away. And that's what they want to do, is get you the value system. They get you to shift just 1% because they know if they can shift a certain flow of water 1%, they can change the whole flow of the stream. So Alexander Dugin, Russian, mentor to Putin, but some say his closest mentor. And he kind of looks almost like a Rasputin type of a character. But I listened to him in these interviews, one with Posner and another one that was in Russia that was interpreted, and then a third one, I think he was on Red Ice Radio with an interview. That's where I first was introduced to him, and I listened to him. And then I started reading some of what he was saying. And with this talk of Russia talking nuclear war and what's going on in Ukraine, and then what happened with Pussy Riot over there in Moscow and how it upset it. And he was talking about, and the guy from Red Ice Radio was talking to him in real heavy Russian accent, so again, hard to listen to. What's angering them? What's upsetting them? Why are they so pissed off? And what they talked about was liberalism. Now, I know from going back into the 30s, with Pavlov and different things like that liberalism was kind of really pushed by the Russians as part of their Cold War technique. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, and breaking up of the marriage, feminism, things like that, to break down the American society, break down the culture and the values of it, because we were in a war. War doesn't mean physical war only. It means psychological war. It means a financial war. There's other types of war, but those are the three main types of war. So they were in a heavy-duty psychological war with using communism in America. Saul Alinsky, he was part of that movement. The book that is one of Obama's favorite, Bill Ayer's favorite. But anyways, so what's happened is that what they started, he realizes that this liberalism that they started has transformed, it's mutated. And basically what the guy was saying was that it is, in a nutshell, liberalism has transformed. And the kind of liberalism that they were talking about was for people, for all people. Communism version of liberalism, to the welfare of all people, even though it didn't manifest very well with Lenin and Stalin killing all the people that they killed. He's saying, okay, that doesn't mean it stops there. Let's grow and let's expand this version. But he says, all things run its course. And he said, this version, our version of liberalism, has run its course. And these are my words, but he was saying it's been hijacked. And it's the American liberalism that the Russians, the Chinese, the world is offended by. Do you know that the biggest threat we look at in America, what's the biggest threat to America? We look at ISIS, we look at Al-Qaeda. Do you know what the rest of the world says? America. I don't think there's an exception to it. Maybe one other country two other countries. But they look at America as the number one threat to world peace. That's scary. That we're living in a country that the rest of the world sees us as a threat to. And so he gets specific into what that threat is, and he talks about liberalism and the kind of liberalism that's coming out of San Francisco. He says it's a new version of fascism. Well, why are the Russians so worried about that? Germany, with what Germany did to Russia, they see the same mentality happening now with what's going on with this type of liberalism. But it's the manipulation, it's the brainwashing part of this that has hijacked liberalism as well, and called political correctness, and it's fascism. It's being used in a certain way. But I'm sorry, fascism being used always will corrupt. It will always get rotten to the core and corrupt the whole thing. And he was talking, and from the readings, they're talking protecting themselves with nuclear weapons. That scares me. And so I get more into listening to what he's saying. He's very interesting, and I'll put a link up there. And you got to consider, okay, yeah, he's saying a lot of things were like how to stop this and how to kill people and what we have to do, and even in his own country. But they're looking at it from a perspective, and Putin keeps them around, and Putin's believing this. So we have to take it into consideration. China believes this. The rest of the world is afraid of us. And he says they're not afraid of conservatives. They're not afraid of the tradition. They want the balance. They know that the balance that the United States brought through its traditional values balanced the world. But this liberalism is upsetting the whole balance because it's so selfish in what it is. And they're willing to do anything to do it. They see similarities in the way that it's happening, the brainwashing, the propaganda that's going on, as Germany. Fascism. Germany was a fascist. Russia was communist. Businesses and corporations and powerful people influencing government to get them to do, not the people, but when we bring money and corporations and things like that. And I don't say take corporations away. I think capitalism is a big part of America in the way it is. But again, yeah, they got too much power. They're holding the ring, and they start getting funky, and they start going off. That the Lord of the Rings is not just a book. It's a metaphor for people in general. It's a metaphor. It's written by a Christian. He knew what he was writing in the books. Same thing, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. In the Hobbit series, what are they? They're metaphors for what's going on inside of each and every one of us in our societies. Not to look at just as a story, but to look at it something deeper. This will also be incorporated into the spiritual stuff once you start relaxing this identity of who you are as a human being. That will pass. And if all you identify as a human being, you don't think that there's anything beyond that. But if you can identify with something bigger, something more than you, that you're a part of, that pre-existed you being here. Something pre-existed you that's bigger than you, that was able to support you while you're being here. There's an environment that was here that preceded you. I want to find out more about that environment that preceded me, and where's the power there. Because that means that there is something that goes beyond. And can I be a part of that? Can that influence my life here? Yes. I say yes. I've experienced it. It doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. I got my crap. Let me tell you, I got lots of it. But compared to who I was, I think it's shifted dramatically. So the thing that Dugin is afraid of, to the point to say that this could cause World War III nuclear, is the aggression and the expansion, not of America, but liberalism under the guise of America. And we've got to get into what is liberalism. And this is what we're going to get into of how it works and how it's been hijacked, and how the liberalism of today isn't the liberalism of the hippies. When I first came to Mount Shasta in 1990, whole different group of people, whole different mentality. Even in the 70s and the 60s, the way that the communists were, the liberals were back then, they're different. This movement has been hijacked. It has been propagandized, and it has people that are in sync, in lockstep. When you look at what's happening with the Republican court and what's happening with Bonner and McConnell and everything, Republicans are angry, and they're splitting and they're fracturing. Why? Because they're able to look at principle. But Everybody's still behind Hillary Clinton. Doesn't matter what she's done, what her past is, what she's doing now. It's the cult of personality. It's the cult of lockstep. It's the big tent that includes everybody except for those that they don't agree with or don't believe in what they believe in. There's a great video on the internet where it shows that they go to the Democratic convention and they're saying, you're a big tent, you'll include everybody. Yes, we're a big tent, we want everybody. How about Republicans? No, 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 no. Conservatives? No, they're not allowed. They're not allowed. So there is a lockstep when you see that no matter, if there was that much corruption with any Republican, including Bush, and towards the end of Bush's, as much as people love Bush, towards the end, they saw a lot of corruption with Cheney and some of the things and didn't agree with it. And they turned. But with Obama, with Hillary Clinton, there's no turning. They're willing at any cost. They're willing to pay any price to get what they want. That's because we've kept them at an immature teenage level. The teenager that you get upset with and the young kid that you get upset with is because they want it and they want it now and they want it any way they can get it, but they don't have enough knowledge of the consequences like that monkey with the AK-47. Too much power. They want to run in and play in the road. They don't understand cars. Same thing with the dog. You don't let the dogs or the cats play in the road. Why? People speed. People are on their cell phones. They don't pay attention. So you're there as a guideline. We are losing our guidelines. We're losing our milestones. Those little rumble strips on the side of the road that let you know we're going off the road, they are loud right now. We are on the rumble strips with the other tire. The other tire is already off the rumble strips. The other ones are off. So let's get into how this happens. I'm going to get into this book, and let's go deep fast. Let's get you to understand this and start to see it and see if I'm crazy or a nut, or maybe I've got a little bit of useful information that might help save your life, might help save the country, and using these tools might just improve the way you live and how you live, because I'm doing a lot more than just telling you this story. This is Mark J. Ryan for part one. This is part two, volume 2, whatever, of probably, which is going to be, it's probably going to be 2 more hours worth of stuff if you can stay with me on it. But I'll get into the basic principles of it going through this book, and it's going to wake you up. I mean, big time. You're going to understand how this is being used against you. And better than that, you're going to be able to be in the now and watch it happening and be able to describe to other people, maybe wake 1 or 2 up. Most of them are going to be asleep and they're not waking up. Sorry. But what I'm going after are those few that are waking up, that might be able to create some kind of a chain reaction and have enough knowledge that we can stop this freight train of fascism going on in our country. This is Mark J. Ryan. I'll talk to you in a minute.